point system come out. And if you had 85 points, they give so many points for each battle that you were in. And I only had 83. I had refused to accept 2 Purple Hearts. I'd been wounded several times, but nothing serious. The medics, field medics, was always able to bind me up, and I continued on. And the reason was because my mother's real sick back home, and when you got wounded, they would notify you folks, and I didn't want to disturb her. And so I refused those Purple Hearts. But when I found out I was short on points, I made a journey down to the doctor, and I said, "Doc, you remember those Purple Hearts you wanted to give me? I'll take one. I'm ready to go home." So then I made me 88. I had enough. And they transferred me out of the 325 into the 194th Glider Infantry of the 17th Airborne to come home to be to get the discharge. And we sailed home and landed at on the 18th of September of 45, and took a train then to Camp Atterbury, Indiana. That's where I got my discharge. But they made a mistake. Instead of sending us to the place to be discharged, they sent us to the induction center. And you're talking about a bunch of mad boys. They asked me, for the physical. They said, "Anything wrong with you?" I said, "No, I'm ready to go home." And so I really didn't have an examination. I could have got, I guess, some, if they'd examined me thoroughly, I would have got perhaps some money out of the deal, but I've never got a penny for anything along that line. So I was discharged on 19th of September 1945. I caught a Greyhound bus, arrived in Sweetwater on the 20th. And I'm so glad now when the boys come back, even though it's only 6 or 8 months that they've been gone, they have a big celebration and people meet them and greet them and everything. I'm glad they do that, because when I arrived back in Sweetwater, there was one girl that worked in a Ford dealer across from where the bus stopped. She had written me while I was overseas, and she happened to see me getting off of the bus. And that's the only one that was there to greet me. And they wouldn't allow the taxis only to go so far, so I had to hitchhike me a ride home. My home was way out in the country from Sweetwater. So that briefly or lengthily, either one you look at it, the ground that I covered. So you can go back in any particular battle or any situation or anything you want to ask, I'll try to answer it.
Did you see much action in Italy when you went from Sicily over to?
Yes, we drove the enemy back. I'll tell you an experience I had there. At that time, I was the company battalion runner, and at the end of the day, they would give me the password to take back to the company. Those on guard of a night, if you know anything about the password, you would say one word and they were supposed to repeat back another certain word. Well, this particular day, I had taken the password to the company the evening before, and they were on one mountain. But what I didn't know, they had moved during the day over to another mountain, and they sent me out late that afternoon with a password, and I went to where I had the day before, and I found myself out in no man's land. I didn't know where they were at or where I really was. And I walked, and suddenly I heard a patrol coming. I didn't know whether it was American or German or what. So there was a little ditch there, and I crawled in the ditch, and it was a German patrol coming through. And I laid there till after they passed by. And it was so comfortable there, I just took me a little nap while I was there. And I got up then and started on, and at 4 o'clock, now I started out at sundown or as it began to get dark. At 4 o'clock the next morning, I was challenged by a guard, and it happened to be my own company guard. I had hit it right on the nail head, and that's unbelievable. But I wandered around there in no man's land all night long, and that's when they pulled us back down to the Salerno Beach and up on the mountain.
Now, when you went into Normandy, that was everybody's first glider insertion into combat, correct? That was your first
for the first 325, yes.
Right. You guys went in. Where did you land in France, and what did you do after that? I mean,
well, we were not able to land in the LC that was allotted to us. See, when we were at Camp Edwards, Massachusetts, we had sand tables, and we acquainted ourselves with the contour of the land, how the beaches were, and where the installations were, and everything. And a certain place that we were supposed to land, which we call a landing zone, or LZ, but we were not able to land in that particular place because the Germans had come out and they dug holes and set up posts and had mines on them to keep us from landing. And what happened, the paratroopers went in first and cut the Germans off from the headquarters, and they were not able to communicate. And when we went in, they were still out there working, putting the poles up. And we had to just momentarily just pick out a landing place, which was a garden-like area. It was surrounded with hedge and a few trees. We cut the top out of a tree with the left wing as we went in. And out of 6, our company, mine was the only one that wasn't completely destroyed. And I was a radio man at that time, carrying a field radio, and it broke the antenna off, and I took the antenna off a walkie-talkie and attached it to the field radio, which is the only means of communication. It was battalion headquarters until we got another radio. And as you read in the book, the different books that I told you about, which was some of Ambrose, D-Day Citizen, Victor's, Patrick O'Donnell's book of Beyond Valor, which we were looking at, John Richlack's book, Guide to Glory, and different ones. The stories in there about after we landed, this old Frenchman was out milking by hand in this apple orchard, and they were shelling this apple orchard where we landed. And I showed you the picture of the glider where we landed. We started walking up the road, and the old Frenchman had finished milking. And he came up the road, and I was very slowly going up the road watching for snipers. And when he approached where I was, I took my canteen cup out and helped it out, and he filled me up a canteen of hot milk. So I had hot milk for breakfast. We'd landed about 10 to 7 in the morning.
Was that the 7th, June 7th?
That was the morning of the 7th. We'd gotten up about 2:30 that morning back in England and boarded the gliders.
And the paratroopers were still, they hadn't linked up with...
well, the 505, I believe it is, that first captured St. Marguerite, the first little town was taken. And they had gone before us, and we were to support them and to keep the bridges intact for the forces coming in from the ocean there, beaches.
You guys have any questions about that? Okay, on to Holland.
Move on to Holland.
Move on to Holland. I'm especially interested in, obviously, the battles you guys had in, again, your support of the 505 around Keekburg Woods, Mook Plain, because I know that Raymond Dentino was killed on September 29th, 1944.
Well, that was 2 of the, I guess, bigger battles that we had was there in the woods. We began the attack on the 27th, and we found out real quick that we didn't have enough men. It bogged down. The Germans were planning also a counterattack, and they were shelling real bad, and the woods is so dense that it was really hard going. And your great uncle was killed in that battle along with 5 others, and then this battle was continued after we got reinforcement and more men there. On the began on the 28th and finished on the 29th. And after that was the Battle of Mook. We were on one side of what seemed to be a desert-like. It was open, and we started to attack early in the morning, and we got about halfway across, and the fog lifted. The Germans were up here in the woods, and this unit was composed of very, very young men, some 12, 14-year-old, and real old men. And when the fog lifted, they just mowed us down. And they took me off of the job I was on, and I spent the rest of the day carrying the wounded and dead out. And it killed every officer in Company B except one. And it was in this battle where Utek, the man that somebody buried, and his remains were not found until 1993. The old Dutchman decided to plow up the pasture land and put it in row crop, and he plowed up one of the lieutenant's boot. And he called the authorities. They came out and found his dog tags, and they sent him to High Value for positive identification. So we go back in 1994 for the 50th anniversary of the invasion of Holland. I was there when he was killed, and had his funeral while I was there at Market Garden or cemetery. They had closed the cemetery, but they opened it in order to bury him with his buddies. And I've got all kinds of pictures of that funeral, or mass it was. I've even got the listing as to what the funeral was and composed of and who did what and so forth. And it was a great big gathering there for that mass funeral. And we did not have, as today, we have many, well, I shall say, African Americans. We didn't have any, absolutely none. But we had a unit that was attached to us. They were supposed to come and pick us up when we were relieved by the Canadians. But they were afraid to come near the front line, and we had to walk about 20 miles through the sleet and snow, and it was turning cold in November, and to get back where they'd pick us up. And that's when they took us from there and back to France, and stayed there until the breakthrough, Battle of the Bulge.
What was the Bulge like when you guys went out there? I know a lot of units that were just thrown in. The 2 airborne divisions that they had were really the only ready reserves, and I know a lot of them were just thrown in without they weren't up to strength, they didn't have the equipment, they hadn't been refitted.
No, and the units who were there, they were very thinly forming a line across there. And the Germans came in and captured a bunch of the Americans who got their uniforms, and we had to watch for that. They would misdirect our trucks going up carrying the troops. They would send them in the wrong direction. They were out directing traffic just like the American boys, and that caused a lot of confusion. Do you know anything about Patton?
I've read a few books.
A lot of people didn't like him, but as far as being